What's up? Welcome to the episode. Today we're going to be chatting about cookies because the idea for this podcast hit me last weekend when I ordered some fancy craft cookies from a local bakery. If you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen these bad boys. They were absolutely delish. I ordered a box of 4, so the flavors were cookie butter score, maple walnut, salted caramel mocha, and a sour cream glazed. The sour cream glazed cookie had a sour cream glazed donut stuffed inside of it. It was insane. These things were dense. They clocked in at around 1,000 calories a pop. Now I had the first cookie around noon after I ate lunch, and it was so good that I decided to have another. I felt super satisfied, really full, but not too full, just like I'm good on the cookie front right now. I went about the rest of my day, went for a big stroll, came home in the early evening, and had a pretty light dinner just because I wasn't all that hungry, which made sense. Post-dinner, I met a friend for a hangout, had a few glasses of wine, and then I got back home and decided that I wanted another cookie, which was again delicious. So delicious that after I finished that one, I wanted to finish off the fourth and final one as well, so I did. This situation got me thinking about quote-unquote disordered eating because a traditional dietitian or nutritionist, I'm sure, would constitute what I did as a binge, an unhealthy behavior, and would likely tell me that I need to eat everything in moderation, and that's just too much for one day. It turns out that about 90% of dietitians and nutritionists are what we call moderators. Moderators moderate. They prefer to indulge in smaller quantities of treats more often. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got abstainers. Abstainers prefer to indulge far less often, but in larger quantities. I'm an abstainer, and this cookie situation was a classic example of abstainer-like behavior. I am perfectly fine not having any treats for possibly weeks at a time, and then when I do decide that I'd like to indulge, I go for it guilt-free, I feel satisfied, and then I might not have another treat for potentially weeks again. So this setup strengthens my resolve, whereas a moderator strengthens their resolve via smaller, more frequent indulgences. Now we're told that moderation is the goal. Everything in moderation. Just have a little bit and call it quits. And if you find it hard to stop after one cookie or a handful of chips, that means that you have an unhealthy relationship with food and you binge and you need to fix that. As a thought experiment, let's just take a step back for a second and look at my cookie situation again. I had 4 of these big-ass cookies over the course of the day, and like I said, a traditional dietitian and nutritionist would likely look at that and say that I binged, and that that's unhealthy. However, what if I had half a cookie per day over the course of the week? Technically, it would be 8 days because there were 4 cookies, but you get the idea. It adds up to the exact same amount over the week as a whole. So what's the difference? Why is having half a cookie per day okay, but having 4 in one day is somehow disordered, even though it's the exact same amount of food? Now, if I was indulging in 4 of these big-ass cookies per day, 3 to 4 times per week, that might be an issue, simply from a health perspective, because I would drive my weight up like crazy, being that my calorie intake would be through the roof. But what if it is just once per week or even every 2 weeks? Again, what's the difference? If you had $200 per week to spend on groceries, you could spend $28.50 per day, or you could just do one big shop and spend all $200 at once. It's the same food in the same quantities that adds up to the exact same amount at the end of the week. How is one right and the other wrong when the outcome is the same? Personally, I have no interest in having half a cookie per day. That just doesn't satisfy me in the same way as having a larger quantity of cookies at once and then having no cookies for a period of time. That feels better to me, and it keeps me on track with my health and fitness goals. Because if I told myself that I needed to spread those cookies out and follow an everything in moderation approach, I would actually end up screwing myself because, again, half a cookie does not satisfy me, and therefore I'm going to end up indulging in more cookies over the course of time because I'm simply not stopping at half a cookie, and I know that about myself. A larger quantity at once satisfies me, and therefore, I prefer to indulge in a larger amount far less frequently. And it works, given my psychology. It actually works for a ton of people, but for some reason, a big part of the nutrition community has decided that you have to use this one approach. I don't buy it. I'm actually proof that there's more than one way to do this because I'm lean, I'm healthy, I feel great about my relationship that I have with food and it fits me. Like, what area of life is there a one size fits all? Essentially nowhere. We're all individuals with different priorities, tendencies, personalities, experiences, and the list goes on. So why would we all have to follow this moderation approach that clearly just doesn't work for everyone? Now, if moderation works for you, have at it. That is great. I'm by no means against it. I just don't like the idea that everyone has to be a moderator because it's simply not the case. And therefore, by telling abstainers that they need to have a moderator set up because it's quote unquote right, it can actually be damaging. It's sort of like loving the sport of basketball but forcing yourself to play hockey because some group of folks decided that hockey is better and morally superior. It just makes no sense because both sports can exist at the same time because different folks prefer one to the other. There are plenty of balls and pucks to go around. Now let's look at this moderation dealio in an evolutionary context for a second because you know me and I love taking an evolutionary approach and working forward from there. We have evidence of hunter-gatherer communities eating 5 pounds of meat in a sitting, 30 oranges back to back, just dummying them, guzzling honey by the liter when they come across it. Now, how do you think it would go over if a dietitian rolled up and was like, excuse me, you need to ration that honey because you're exhibiting binge-like behavior? We have a get it while it's hot mentality around food because that served us given our food environment for the vast majority of our evolution. We haven't had refrigerators and non-perishable goods that last for months and months, if not years. And so someone can make the argument that we're actually designed to quote unquote binge, as some folks would label it. The primary difference is that before, our quote-unquote binges were controlled by food access via the environment. However, now we have an abundance of food availability all the time, yet many of us still have the same tendency. Our stomachs have the ability to expand like crazy and fit a ton of volume of food for a reason. Now, I'm not making these evolutionary points because I think that we should be eating ridiculous quantities of food on a daily basis. I make this point because this is our evolutionary tendency, and therefore it's important to be aware of it in order to set ourselves up for success given that our food environment has changed so much, and we do have access to food 24/7 now, whereas we didn't before. Being that not everyone is able to stop at a single scoop of ice cream or a square of dark chocolate and feel satisfied, these folks need a different approach. I'm one of those folks. I've worked with plenty of folks that fall into the abstainer category as well. And it's sad because so many of them come to me thinking that they have to be a moderator because that's the right way to interact with food. And therefore, they shoot themselves in the foot because they try to moderate with treat-like foods, overeat because it's not their inclination, and then they're actually worse off for it health and body composition wise, versus if they accepted their tendency, knew that it was okay to indulge in larger quantities less frequently if that works for them, didn't label it binge behavior and just made it fit within their goals, lifestyle, etc., and actually had more success. That's what I work towards with a lot of the folks that I coach. We examine tendencies and find out how to work with them versus against them because swimming upstream is a hell of a lot harder than going with the current. Now, I will say that the moderation and abstaining spectrum is a large one, and it can also vary from thing to thing. So, for example, I used to be more of an abstainer when it came to alcohol. I used to have 10 plus drinks or no drinks. However, my relationship with alcohol has shifted, and now I take a more moderate approach. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for this. The primary one being that I just drink far less than I used to. But the point being, your tendency isn't necessarily a fixed thing. Just because you lean towards a moderator or an abstainer-like approach now doesn't mean that you have to or will forever. The whole reason I wanted to put this episode together is because I want to challenge the idea that there is a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to interacting with food for a number of reasons. The primary one being that the moderation approach just clearly doesn't work for a lot of people. And this topic is close to my heart because I was one of those folks that thought that moderation was the ultimate goal because it's the right way to go about interacting with food, apparently. But the truth is, it just didn't work for me. And I've seen firsthand in plenty of clients that I've worked with that it doesn't work for them either. If you find it hard to keep chips, cookies, and ice cream, donuts in the house and not eat them all, that's normal behavior no matter what anyone tells you. Because if they say it's not, they're ignoring our entire evolutionary history and how we're wired to eat more, move less, and seek out these hyper-palatable, calorie-dense foods. They are highly rewarding to the brain. So the key question becomes, if moderation hasn't worked for you, meaning you're more of an abstainer, how do you set yourself up for success? First and foremost, be honest about your tendency or inclination. The biggest issue that I see abstainers run into is refusing to admit that they're abstainers. They want to believe that they can moderate with highly processed foods, and they often just can't. But then they look at the tendency as a weakness because they see the media spouting off everything in moderation, and they're like, fuck, what am I doing wrong here? I have no discipline. I lack willpower. I must be broken. So take a really objective look at where you're at, what your tendency truly is, and work forward from there. Because trying to fit a square peg into a round hole just doesn't work. And know that moderating is not better than abstaining, and abstaining isn't better than moderating. Because extroverts aren't better than introverts, and introverts aren't better than extroverts. They're just different. Once you've established where you're at on the spectrum, modify your food environment because if it's not accessible, you can't eat it. And so we want to create effort barriers between you and poor food choices and make it as easy as possible to make healthful decisions. For example, clean out your home, ditch all the tempting treats because chances are, if you're still listening to this episode, you're an abstainer. And so this is how an abstainer sets themselves up for success. Now, I realize that if you live with a partner or family members that your food environment isn't solely up to you. However, if you have a really honest conversation with your loved ones and explain why you find it difficult to treat food so accessible, I'd be surprised if they weren't willing to modify right along with you, and I'm sure you can figure something out. After you cleaned out your fridge, pantry, etc., do a big grocery shop and grab lots of healthful, single ingredient whole foods and stock your fridge because we want this stuff easily accessible. Next, establish what your goals are and potentially what sort of indulgence schedule that works for you given those goals. So for example, maybe you decide that a treat meal or two per week works well for you. Awesome. Do that. You can always modify and adjust along the way, but I find that having some sort of structure can be helpful for adherence, especially with abstainers. Personally, I find for myself that I eat a little less during the week and usually have one evening on either Friday or Saturday where I enjoy some treat-like foods. That works for me, but everyone is different. So it's important that you find the setup that works best for you, again, within the context of your personal goals and aspirations. Also, keep in mind that your tendency can shift and change over the course of time as you shift and change as a person. And this is where labels can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So be sure to be honest with yourself, yet at the same time, don't pigeonhole yourself too harshly if you do find that your preferences slide one way or another over the course of time. A few more quickfire tips. I recommend folks delete food apps like Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats off of their phones every time that they use them because it creates a small little effort barrier where you need to download the app if you want to use the delivery feature again, which oftentimes deters you from ordering altogether. Also, be mindful of following certain social media food accounts because we are inundated with food all day long as it is. So we don't want even more reminders every time we open Facebook or Instagram. This qualifies as your food environment as well. Implement a no leftovers rule. So if you go out for dinner and, I don't know, you get pizza or something, if you don't finish every slice, do not bring it home because you will eat them the following day. So keep restaurant meals as an out of the house experience. If you're keen on learning more about this moderator and abstainer stuff, you can look up a woman named Gretchen Rubin. She's the person who originally put this stuff on my radar, and I would highly recommend her work. And most importantly, there is no one-size-fits-all, quote-unquote, relationship with food. Find out what works for you and forget about all of this right, wrong, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy stuff. Everyone is different. So if we put the judgment aside for a second, we can more clearly see what is and what works. If you're interested in applying for one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can click the link in the description below or head on over to n1fitness.com/coaching. Follow me up on Instagram at n1fitness and feel free to friend me on Facebook at Marcus Sadu. Leaving a review really helps the pod grow and reach more folks, so if you're willing to do that, I truly appreciate it. And if you've already left a review, muchas gracias. Lastly, be sure to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're using. Thanks for tuning in. I really hope that this was a helpful episode for you. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.